Welcome into a week 3 Giants Hangout brought to you by Crestron. My name is Madeline Burke, joined as always by Russ Salzberg and the two-time Super Bowl champ, Jonathan Casillas. Guys, Giants coming off a week 2 loss that strikes a very different tone than the week 1 loss. I mean, if I were to tell you, hey, the Giants are going to score 3 touchdowns, they're not allowing a single touchdown, you feel like that's a recipe for a win. There were a lot of positives in this game, but there are still a lot of things to build off of, Russ.
Well, yeah. Look, to me, and it's been beaten into the ground, quite frankly, far too many times about getting hurt. Guy got hurt in the game. It's part of football. Jonathan's played it. That happens each and every week. It just so happened that it happened on the first play of the game. It was a freak thing, so that happened. To me, what surprised me in the game. And as you say, you score 3 touchdowns, you don't give up a touchdown, and you still lose the game. I was really shocked about how much the time of possession that the Commanders had. It was like 37 minutes to 38 minutes to 22 minutes in their favor. And the run game, I mean, they just it wasn't just the run game. And, Jonathan, as a defensive player, I'm sure you could address that. It wasn't just the run game. It was the lack of tackling. There was some really poor tackling there. The run fits. I mean, as Dable said right after the game, that's where they need to improve. And he said it the last couple of days.
Yeah, look, and I was able to watch it over. Look, I think Drew Phillips, Tyler Newman, and the young new rookies, I think they've been playing fairly well, but there was a couple times where the Commanders schemed to get on the outside, whether it was single back or backs in the backfield, and they split flow. Whenever you do that, you create single gaps along the front. And if you're a second late or a little bit too tight, you can get exposed. And that's what was happening, last week with the Commanders. Just one guy maybe a little bit out of position, a little bit late. And Brian Robinson did a great job on getting on the edges and finding those open holes and creases. And look, I think the offense last week, huge step forward, moving the ball down the field, getting it when it needed, basically coming within a drop pass from winning this game offensively, and then defensively, I think they took a step backwards. And that's been basically the recipe for this team for the last 2 years, these first 2 weeks. And then last year's, like, you'll see signs of improvement in one place, and then you'll see a couple steps back or a step back in another place. So we all talked about complementary football. The Giants have to figure that out.
But the one thing, and we touched on it, you touched on it, Daniel Jones. I mean, everybody wanted to bury him after week 1. The questions were idiotic to him, to Dable. You're going to make a coaching change after week 1. A guy hadn't played in 10 months in a real football game. He had to be cold pretty much in that first half because there was the clock domination by the Commanders. But, both for you, Jonathan, and Madeline, with a $150 left, he takes the ball. I mean, he just took him downfield. That was a great drive. He took him downfield, and the whole drive was 1:42. And you know what? When you look at the stats on that drive, there was only 1 third down. What do we always say? If you don't make it, if you get good yardage on first and second downs, you're not stuck in that third down situation. The only third down conversion that they made on that entire drive was the one to Neighbors for the touchdown.
And when we looked at the first week, right, the Giants, collectively as a whole, it wasn't that great of a performance, losing that badly to the Vikings, who are, I mean, I think we all can say after the 2 weeks in, they might be a little better than we all thought, beating San Francisco last week. And I was like, this is a huge game. If it wasn't the Commanders, I don't think it would have been that much emphasis on Daniel Jones having to play better. And that's the thing. Russ, he did play better, Matty. He did play better. I saw a different quarterback in week 2 than I saw in week 1. He's back, getting in the right, process of being back, because after the first week happened, nobody really talked about him having that long layoff. They were just talking about how poorly he played.
Right.
But, like, I don't know about you guys. When you guys take a long time off from whatever you're doing and you come back, you might be a little rusty at first. That's what happens. And I want to see forward and make strides forward and get the ball distribution a little bit more, because 4 different receivers catching passes in one game, I don't think that's a recipe for success.
Well, I will say too that, to Daniel Jones and the offense's credit, like they were efficient early. They scored a touchdown on the opening offensive drive of the game. That's the first time the Giants have done that in 27 games. That is the longest active streak in the National Football League, coming to an end in week 2 as the Giants were able to score a touchdown in the opening drive. And Brian Dable said that the week leading into that game, saying, how do you get this team better? How do you get this team on track? Well, you got to get in the end zone. You got to score touchdowns. The offense was able to do that. The defense, we talked about it a little bit, the tackling struggled. And Casillas, you made a point earlier about the schematic advantage that Washington had with the gaps structure and all that. But I'm curious too, there were a lot of situations where guys had their hands on guys and just weren't able to bring them down. How do you clean that up going into week 3?
It's difficult because of the lack of physicality in training camp, so they're not really, prepping themselves to tackle people. Like the
But
only
every
way to
team has
prepare.
that lack of physicality, right?
I agree. And then if you look around the league, there's been a lot of missed
Yeah.
tackles.
But it seems we've been talking about this, not this year, not last year, for the last 5 years. Everything has changed with the new training the rules and what you can do and what you can't do. The tackling, that to me was shocking. It just was. But let's be honest about something else. And Jonathan brought it up that you can't do ifs. If this guy did this, if this guy did that, because let's put it this way: 2 of the offensive stars of the game for the Giants, 2 of them was both Malik and Motor. Okay, Devin Singletary. What happened? Both of them made huge mistakes. Neighbors couldn't hold on to that last pass. And what would have been a big gain and a momentum game and a first down, I mean, nobody felt worse than Devin Singletary.
Right. Well, and both teams had some big mistakes. I mean, Washington had countless penalties in the red zone that backed themselves up and gave themselves a longer field position. And now you're turning the page to a week 3 matchup in Cleveland against a Browns team that, yes, beat the Jacksonville Jaguars 18-13 in week 2, but the Browns had 13 penalties for 100 yards. The Browns had a lot of shoot themselves in the foot moments. And also the Browns gave up a lot of pressure on quarterback Deshaun Watson. I know that Jack Conklin and Jedrick Willis Jr. Were out. They're 2 tackles and have returned to practice. We'll see how that plays into their availability for the game. But getting pressure on the quarterback going into week 3, a point of emphasis, as well as, just being able to play a clean game.
But
yeah.
Always remember this. We're talking about, like, for example, the Commanders made mistakes too. Yeah, but you know what? It doesn't matter who you're playing. If you win the game, your mistakes are far less glaring than when you lose the game. When you lose the game, as the Giants did, then everything gets dissected all over again.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it really comes down to. And, this week, watching Deshaun Watson week 2 game versus Jacksonville versus his first game against Dallas in week 1, he has improved just like Daniel Jones. He's also a quarterback that's been out, because of an injury. So, you had to pay attention to that and seeing the type of danger that he presents for the Giants defense. And Jerome Ford, the Browns have that ground, run the ball down your throat mentality. Jerome Ford has been doing a good job in replacement for Chubb, and they want to have a physical team led by their defense. So this is a game the Giants going into, the Browns seen the film last week. They're going to try to run the football. They're going to try to, establish their physical dominance offensively on the ground. Deshaun Watson looked like he came back. He had some great targets. Jerry Jeudy had a good game last week. Amari Cooper, he's known the Giants. He's done some damage against the Giants playing for that team down in Texas. So, this is a tough task to ask for the Giants defense. We all understand how good Dexter Lawrence is, but other guys need to play better, need to play well, need to play like we used to seeing them play. Bobby Okereke, love him to death. One of my favorite linebackers in the league. and I talk to him, all the time whenever I get a chance to interact with him. He has to play better. He has to be more impactful on the game because he's good enough to do it. And that's what we've seen from him in year one. And then also Burns and Thibodeau, they have to have more of an impact every single game. This is the truth of the matter. The two best players on defense is number one, Dexter Lawrence. He's been dominant. Number two, Drew Phillips is the second best player on the Giants defense. He showed up both weeks. Yes, he made a couple mistakes because he's young, but
Led the team in tackles last
do
week.
you see the fight? And we talked about this on BBKL a couple times. We were talking about the fights that were happening during training camp when Detroit was at practice, right? I was like, man, Drew Phillips, he kept on getting in Amon-Ra St. Brown's face. And look who the guy who's playing at a very high level right now, the same guy that wasn't backing down from one of the best receivers in the league during training camp. It's just the mentality that you have to
Football,
play in this league. And he
it-
has that mentality.
It's a junkyard, schoolyard, in the street, back alley mentality, which it seems he had. I'm glad you brought him up also, JC, because you said you watched the game again. Let me tell you, he got called and was also in a crucial situation. Phillips got called on defensive holding.
That was a rough call right there.
Oh my goodness! I mean, even the
Tight end
announcer
basically ran him over.
He was run over, like steamrolled over. I mean, if he held on to anything, just as he was falling. That was a terrible call. Also in a bad situation. But you know what? You got to go take care of business. You got to allow yourself to be in a position where one play is not going to make or break your back. You have to go take care of business. And you've been mentioning the defense. Listen, the offensive line for the Giants we talking about Daniel Jones, that's also connected to the offensive line, and the offensive line had a huge improvement off of, week one. But you also, in terms of the defense, I thought you mentioned Brian Burns. Burns made a very interesting comment after the game. He said, we have to show, he was talking in terms of more stamina. And Daves was asked about that. When Burns said more stamina, what do you say about that? He said, finishing plays.
Yeah, but it's not just a physical stamina; it's a mental stamina too.
Yeah,
and I say this, like, the first week, you didn't have great quarterback play, but why would you not rise up to the occasion as a defender? Hey,
right.
Our offense is struggling. Let's go out there and do what we need to do to get them another chance to get the ball in their hands so they can figure that thing out over there. And the reason why I brought up Drew Phillips, because a player playing like that can be infectious. It can be very infectious. Yes, he's not perfect, but you don't have to be perfect to play hard in the NFL. It's here. It's from the heart. And that's what Drew Phillips is doing. If all other 10 guys on defense can play with that same type of attitude, there's one guy that's not on that line, Dexter Lawrence. There's one guy that's playing, I think, at another seed and another type of mentality than everybody else on the back seven. And like I said, I love Bobby. I think he's a tremendous player. But me as a linebacker, seeing a young kid playing like that, it's like, all right, man, I gotta tighten up. I don't know why I'm not, affecting the game as much as I want to, because Bobby Okereke, he's a stat leader. He caused a lot of turnovers last year. Yes, he got a fumble recovery this year so far, but he caused a lot of turnovers last year, a lot of TFLs. He created a lot of havoc. And right now, the Giants on defense need their players to play at the level that we know they can, because we've seen it happen from every single defender. We just need them to start playing like the same way that Drew Phillips is playing. We need that to be infectious, and they will do some damage in this game coming forward and for the rest of the year.
Right. Well, and you talked about the strengths and the threat of the Cleveland offense, but looking back at that Jacksonville game just from week 2 that the Browns played in, Jaguars.com was writing about it, and they said, hey, the Jags pressured Watson on 18 of his 38 dropbacks. Multiple pressures coming at the same time, but they only got 2 sacks, 8 quarterback hits out of it because they weren't able to close in. But putting the quarterback under pressure is something that Jacksonville was able to do. You got to think that, Kayvon Thibodeau, Bobby Okereke, Brian Burns, these guys are looking at that saying like, okay, how do we capitalize on this situation and put that quarterback under pressure? Because as much strength as you attributed to this Browns offense, their defense is really I think, the point that this Giants team has to worry about, right? That defense, especially their secondary, Denzel Ward, Martin Emerson Jr., like they are a strong secondary, and these receivers are going to have, their work cut out for them in this one.
Well, not just the receivers, the offensive line as well. I mean,
Right.
it's as we always say, collectively complementary. That's what has to be done. Jonathan was talking about, bringing a mentality. You see how excited Jonathan is over Drew Phillips? Well, he's a former player and he's all excited. We need the current players on defense to get just as excited, to take over that mentality and say, let's go. But here's the good news, everybody. Here we are dissecting, talking about two games. And the first one was a complete horror. Second game was an improvement. Your Giants are only one game out of first place after 2 weeks. They're only one game out of first place. So
that's the glory of the National Football League, too.
yeah,
This isn't college football. You lose a game or two, that's okay. I mean, I can't tell you how many guys I've talked to this week. Well, I won a Super Bowl in a season in which we started 0-2. Like, it's possible. Not saying that this Giants team is going to win the Super Bowl, but we're only in September.
they have to go out, and you use the term several times, talking this morning, Jonathan, collective. They have to go on collectively as a group to make sure that they play complementary football.
Because
Absolutely.
a lot of people too looking at this schedule saying, hey, these next 6 games are potential playoff teams. As a player, Casillas, when you're looking at that and you're hearing that noise and trying to keep it out, but you can't help but hear some of it, like, obviously, yes, take it 1 week at a time, but how do you navigate that, especially when you kind of know, all right, we got a mountain of a schedule coming up?
See, I never looked at it like that as a player, and I'm sure players really don't. If they have like if there's kids from like Dallas, they might be looking for like, hey, my family's coming up next week. But as far as like, hey, we got a big matchup next week against Dallas. I've never done that. I don't know too many guys that has done that because it's so hard to win one game in the NFL, and it doesn't matter what that team record is, the Commanders, even though the Giants have done very well against them, every single game against the Commanders is tough. Every single game comes down to the fourth quarter, who makes the last few plays, who can survive the battle of attrition during the games, not just during the season. So every single week is very crucial to the end and where you want to be at the end of the year. I would show the whole team Drew Phillips plays. I would show them every single play and say, this is what we need from every single one of y'all.
Yep. I'm sure that film, they've all seen it.
Yeah.
Well, 1-0 each week is the goal. And week 3, not unlike any other, heading to Cleveland, a tough place to play, but it's the next game on the matchup. The most important game of the season is the next one, and we will be keeping up to date with all the latest leading into the Browns game, and of course following it as well. That's a wrap for our week 3 Giants Hangout, brought to you by Crestron. Madeline Burke, Russ Salzberg, and Jonathan Casillas. We'll see you next time.